This is a really fast project. You know, and it's really great if you already have jeans that you can use. You know, instead of buying a whole new garment, you can recycle your jeans into a fun new skirt. We're going to sew along here and along here to finish this first, and then we're going to add this in at the end. So, okay, you want to pin this seam to this seam. Just gonna gather up my leg here so I can reach it. All right, so I'm just gonna put a couple pins here, again, to make sure it lays nice and flat. All right, and after you pin it, just check and make sure it's still laying nice and flat. See how that's nice and flat? All right, and then I'm just gonna add another pin right here. Actually, I'm going to pin it this way. All right, so that's pinned. All right, so I'm just going to use my straight stitch machine, and I'm going to use, I have black thread in there. I'm just going to continue with the black thread. I want to use a color thread that sort of blends into the denim. Let's tackle the back first. So I'm going to start at the hem, and basically what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stitch just inside my serged edge. Now, if you're working with, if you don't have a serger, you can sew it together first and then use a zigzag and zigzag in the seam allowance to keep it from fraying. I just serged them together because it was easier. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just start stitching, and I'm just using my regular straight stitch. It's about 3 millimeters long. All my serger thread is going to be in the seam allowance, so I'm stitching just, you know, outside this needle thread right there. And then when I get up to where the original seam was, I'm going to follow along and make sure I sew in deep enough so all that dark is not showing. When you go over the flat felled seam where the yoke is sewn onto the back leg, go slow. And then I'm just going to sew up as high as I can go. And I'm going to back tack and finish that seam. All right, so I did catch all the dark in my seam allowance. You can see the top stitching there, but maybe what I'll do is I'll just put more top stitching down to hide it. We'll see, but at least I can tell that I sewed in deep enough to hide all that dark denim in the seam allowance. All right, so the next thing is we're gonna go to the front, get it in there so it's laying flat like this inside. So I'm sewing inside the circle, so they're inside out, and I'm gonna start at the very top of my front fly where it's overlapped. And basically what I want to do is I just want to stitch along the edge. I'm just going to back tack, and then I'm just going to stitch right along that edge. Take my pins out as I come to them. I'm going to hand walk. It's pretty heavy right here because that's where it overlapped. I'm just going to hand walk it the last couple of stitches, meaning I'm turning my hand wheel over here till I get to the corner. Then I'm going to pivot, and I think I'll hand walk it a little bit to get it started here. That is a little heavy there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stitch right along. till I get to the where the V starts. I'm going to backtack. All right. All right, let's take it out and look at what we have now. All right, so you can see now it's sewed shut. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take my V and I'm going to lay it under there. And I'm going to kind of use the chalk line that I had to kind of position it similarly to the way it was positioned. All right, so see how that looks? And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pin each side. So I'll start over here, and then I'm going to pick up this side and pin this side like this. And then I can go in and I can pin a little bit. Now, I probably only need 4 pins here. Okay, so I can see that that's laying nice and flat. All right, so I can sew it from this direction. Just make sure you're not catching the back when you're sewing the front. So again, I'm just going to sew up. Take this pin out. I'm going to sew all the way up till I'm on top of the V. Then I'm going to pivot and come back down this way. So then I'm just going to come straight down. Okay. All right, so before we sew it again, let's just make sure it looks as lovely in the back as it does in the front. So there's how it looks in the front. See, in the back, it looks lovely too. Nothing's bunched up. So now I'm going to sew again, but this time I'm going to sew on the other side of the top stitching because I want to hold this seam allowance flat, or the extra flat. So I'm going to sew over here. And if you're using a dark thread, it will blend into the denim. And again, I'm going to sew all the way up on top of this side, and then I'll just pivot it around and sew back down. Perfect. All right, see how lovely that looks? I'm just going to clip this. I'm going to clip this. I'm going to clip this. All right, for one final step, we have 2 things to do in the back now. I think I'm going to add some top stitching so I can blend in the line from the original top stitching here. All right, so I'm just going to use this top stitching thread from Coats and Clark. I really like the way this works in my machine. It's very easy to get the tension right, and it's a pretty similar color to what's in the jeans. So let me just rethread. So taking time to top stitch that center back seam really adds to the durability of that center back seam. Plus it makes it look like ready to wear instead of homemade. Now, of course, if you're using top stitch thread, you're going to want to use a top stitch needle that has a big eye for that thread to go through, plus a scarf for it to lay in as you're stitching. I had a top stitch needle in here the entire time because it's also a pretty hefty needle and it's denim friendly. All right, so I'm going to start at the top, and the goal when you're top stitching is to stitch through the garment and both seam allowances to make it more secure. So I'm starting up near the top, and I'm just gonna back tack one. And then when I go over the hump here, I'm gonna really go slow. All right, and then I'm just going to follow along and top stitch through both seam allowances, and I'm using this marking on the denim from the previous top stitching to guide my new top stitching. All right, and then I'm just going to keep going all the way to the bottom. I'm just going to make sure I'm not sewing anything I shouldn't be sewing, because this is such a short skirt. I'm sewing from the top. If you're working with a longer skirt, turn it inside out and sew so the right side is inside. That way you can see where you're going. But as you can see here, it's very short, so it's fine. All the way to the bottom. All right, so let's see how that looks. All right, look how nice that looks. All right, so see, this is where we started. So you can see the remnants of the original flat felled seam to where we switched it to a regular seam. But the cool thing is I'm going to sew this belt loop back on, and then it'll camouflage all of that. You won't see it because it'll be underneath the belt loop. So just to make it more friendly to sew on, I'm going to get rid of all of this original thread under here. We want to have it be reduce the bulk as much as possible. So I'm just really getting rid of all that original top stitching thread. That'll make it easier to sew back on. All right, so now I'm just going to fold it back up on its crease, and I'm just going to top stitch it on. I'm not going to try to do that little zigzag stitch that I took out. I'm going to use a straight stitch. And I'm just going to stitch, actually I'm going to hand stitch it so I don't break my needle, because it's pretty heavy. So when I say hand stitch, I mean I'm taking my hand, hello, and I'm turning the hand wheel towards me. And that way I don't have to worry about it breaking a needle. Now instead of going backwards to back tack, I'm going to lift it up, and I'm going to go in the same direction again. So basically I'm stitching forward twice instead of back tacking. And I'm just using my hand wheel to make it stitch. All right, so let's look how that looks. So see? And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave a tail here. And I'm going to see if I can pull it to the inside so I can tie it into a knot. See if I can do that. Yeah, see, I can pull it to the inside, and then what I'll do is I'll just tie it into a knot. I'm just going to do a quick square knot here. Left over right, right over left. And this way I don't have to worry about it coming undone or trying to do a knot or a back tack on a heavy, bulky area like the end of a belt loop. I think I'll go 3 times. Right over left, left over right, and then right over left again. There. All right, so now that should stay put. All right, so let's take a look at our finished skirt. Here's the back. I think that's lovely, even though I didn't quite match that. I think the overall effect Abby's going to be happy with. But see, the belt loop is reattached, so it hides the top of that seam. All right, in the front, there's the front of our skirt. I'm going to just trim this. All right, so the cool thing is now you want to wash this a few times because these edges will fray really nicely and it'll be a really cool skirt. I'm guessing with Abby I'm going to have to take an inch or two off because she wanted it to be short, but at least I know I have enough to work with. All right, so that's how you DIY your jeans into a skirt. If you have any questions or comments, please post them below and I'll help you. I hope you enjoyed this. If you're interested in the skirt I showed you at the beginning of the video, check the comments below for a link to my online store for the step-by-step how to do that. And I hope you enjoyed this, and I will see you again soon.